What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 457. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, surrounded by beautiful magic cards, it's Luis Scott-Vargas.
Hey, Marshall. Yeah, we were talking about old cards, and I sent Marshall a picture of my desk right now, and you can just see all these like old cards sitting here. The context being that I need to organize these and put them in a safety deposit box. But
yeah, I think you should probably do that. But
it increases the podcast's effectiveness in my happiness to know that literally right now I just picked up an old Shivan dragon. I'm just going to look at it while we record. So
that's good. Get you all hyped up. That is a beautiful old card. Boy, covering that beta draft at the Pro Tour last time sure was exciting. Seeing those old cards, it gets something going in you. I don't know how else to describe it. We're talking about new cards this time, though. Really, really new cards and kind of much newer cards than we were just talking about. We're doing the M19 Sunset show here. So we're bidding adieu to this core set, sending it along its merry way. But we're also going to talk about our preview cards, our exclusive preview cards from Wizards. Thanks for that, WotC. We've got 5 of those to talk about after. So let's get going. Let's just get right into it. First things first, the show's brought to you by channelfireball.com. Make sure that you get those pre-orders in for Guilds of Ravnica right now. You can go on to Channel Fireball, pick up any singles or sealed product. There's different combinations and packages you can get over there. And the way it works is you order it now, and then boom, the day that they're able to ship them to you, they will do so. They'll send them in the mail. Oh, there's more.
With any Guilds of Ravnica pre-order, you also get a 1/1 insect token.
Oh, God, I saw this. What's the creepiest thing ever?
Featuring yours truly. It's a... every
How
time
did this happen, man?
Okay, so basically, Channel Fireball wanted to do another token, and we reached out to WotC to figure out, like, hey, is there a token in the next set that's like kind of cool or unique, like without knowing any of the cards or anything like that? But they told us, there's a 1/1 black-green insect, and Andy, my editor, was like, hey, would you be cool being this token? And I'm like, yeah, sure. How bad could it be? Well, last week I got the art and I found out how bad it could be. It's not me as a bug. It's just literally a bug with my head on it. So
yeah, it is literally the creepiest token I've ever seen in my life.
I look very smug apparently too, which is so weird because I'm totally not smug in real life.
Yeah, no, you're so chill and laid back. So wait, people get one of these with a pre-order?
They do. So you'll get one of these with every Guilds of Ravnica pre-order, and it'll be a special I think the border special, because we're gonna put these in with normal orders afterwards, but the special one with an extra carapace or something, God, or more detailed wings. I don't know, something like that. But
can you opt out?
Yes, if you put in the notes that you want a different token, you could get a different token instead.
No, come on, you gotta get the special edition Luis Insect token. So make sure you head over to channelfireball.com to get those pre-orders and your LSV insect tokens right now. Also, the show's brought to you by Patreon, patreon.com/limited resources. And by Patreon, I mean by you, of course, by the people who help support this show by heading on over there and pledging. We do a couple of cool things on there. In fact, we do a bunch of, you get Discord, you get a card, you get a bunch of neat stuff for being a patron. You get to answer questions on the Patreon question of the week, or when we do our Q&A episodes. I'll also often put up a post for when we have a guest on, for getting questions that you want answered from the guest. And I incorporate those into the questions that I end up asking. Also, I occasionally will ask for help on special projects. Like I'm starting to conceptualize the next special edition LR, like the one I did with Huey and Ben Stark, a month or two ago. I'm starting to think about how the pain of that has finally worn off of having made that thing. And now I'm like, hey, that sounds fun again. So I'm figuring out who and what we're going to be talking about. And I'm probably going to be putting a post up on the Patreon to ask for ideas about that. So it's all kind of a big collaborative effort, but also I like to reward our patrons the best way that I can. And one of those ways is I've got a stack of playmats. Luis, anybody who goes out to a whole ton of GPs ends up with a lot of playmats, and I have a million of them. And
including the Pro Tour playmat, right?
Oh, totally. All of them. I got the one with Jace on the beach. I got the
last Pro Tour had this really cool playmat that is just like 50 different pieces of magic art, all like kind of stitched together. It's hand embroidered or hand stitched or what have you. And
I have sweet. That one. Mm-hmm.
I actually bought that playmat. I never buy a playmat, but I actually bought that one at the Pro Tour, and I used it during the Pro Tour. I wanted to fight back against the perception that pros never use playmats. It was a nice playmat, so I actually used it.
Yeah, that playmat's beautiful, and I do have one, and I will be giving it away, because what I'm going to be doing is every single week, I'm going to be giving away one of these event playmats to one of our patrons. All you have to do is be a patron, and you will be automatically entered into that. It's just a thank you. You don't have to do anything other than be a patron, and I'm just going to be sending one of these things out every week looking at the pile for the foreseeable future. But I always look for any way I can to thank our patrons. And that's going to be happening. The first one, let me grab it, because we're giving away one right now. This one is from GP Detroit. And this is, what card is this? It's this red creature. Man, I can't remember what card this is. Anyway, I'll put a picture of it up. It's sweet though. But I'll put a picture of it up on the Patreon. And this one is going out to Alden Harris from Houston, Texas. Alden, thanks so much for your support. I'm going to put this in a bubble mailer, and this thing will be out to you probably next week.
Yeah, I was trying to Google the GP Detroit playmat, because I didn't actually get one of those, but I couldn't find the current one, so I don't know what it is. Yeah, no, I would know it by art, I think.
You absolutely would. And I can't remember what it is. You know what I'm going to do, Luis? I'm sending you a picture of this thing, and we're going to figure it out on the show live right now. Boop. There you go. All right. So thank you so much, Alden, for your support, and everybody else. So look forward to it. Like I said, I'm going to just be doing this I'm just going to do this until this whole entire stack of these things is gone. And thank you for everybody who was a patron. We've got our Patreon question of the week that I mentioned a minute ago from Anthony, who says, which Magic players do two of you look up to, and what have you learned from them that's helped shape your game?
Oh, that's Abbot of Carol Keep, by the way.
Yeah, there we go. Abbot of Carol Keep artwork on that playmat. What players have we looked up to? He said the podcast rocks, and the episode with Huey and Ben was amazing work. All right. Well, there you go. I guess I should make another one. Who do you look up to, Luis? I mean, I assume you had I don't know, mentors or totally. Heroes when you were coming up. I mean, now you're the one that everybody else looks up to, but what about when you were coming up?
So this is a really good question. I think if I had to name the 5 people who taught me the most about Magic, Ben Stark would be one of them for sure. Mm-hmm. I've learned the most about Limited, mostly with him berating me for years and years. Like, Ben is really funny, where Ben doesn't have much in the way of not in the way of emotions. Ben does have emotions. He is a human being, but he's not particularly gentle when it comes to talking about like skill levels and stuff like that, or mistakes, because it doesn't bother him if you point out his mistakes. Like, one of the things Ben is likely to do is, like, you lose badly in a pro tour that means a lot for you, and he'll just start coming and telling you all the things you did wrong, not because he means poorly, because he would want you to do the same to him. So, right. But luckily, I'm the kind of person who can take that pretty well. We've had other people on our team who haven't been as good at it, and I've learned a lot from Ben as a result. He really understands Limited really well. Like, the joke he always made was that if he could draft the decks and I could play them, we would be very hard to stop. So,
yes.
But I think Ben is the person who has taught me the most about Limited. But in terms of Magic, Paulo Vitor Damarosa, another person who's, there's a reason he has 12 Pro Tour top 8s. He's just very good at cutting right to the heart of the matter. You and I have talked about how Paulo has that ability when you're just debating about non-Magic things. And it's just true in Magic too. Like, a lot of people aren't as concise as he is, and he's very good at cutting right to exactly what matters and kind of disregarding the rest. I know he won't hear it because he doesn't listen to the podcast, but Paul Chiano is one of the people who's responsible for, so among the most of my development, just because we lived together and played together when we're both on the PTQ grind and, back then. And we just it was a lot of us leveling each other up, like, offering advice on plays and what you should do and all that. And because I think what's important is, especially for listeners who are looking to get better at Magic, is you want a combination of things. First of all, you never want to be the best Magic player in the room, right? Like, it's better to be, you will learn more from people who are better than you. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where what I got from, like, Ben, for example. Like, Ben, is and was better at me better than me at limited, so I got to learn a lot from him. But also people like Paulo and Chion, who are my peers, it's also really important to be able to have this dialogue, because to some degree, it's really good to, like, you open an article or you watch like a Reed Duke video and you're like, wow, Reed's really good at Magic and I can learn a lot from him. But it's harder to imagine like there being a dialogue there. It's mostly you asking him questions and him responding, right? Like when you're talking with even like the best player at your shop or in your play group. When the skill levels are very close and it's not really clear who's better, or you're both near the same level, you get a lot more back and forth, which is really useful too. So right. I think I've gotten a lot out of that. So those are probably like the three people who have taught me the most, and I think the listeners will probably recognize most of those people. Paul Chion, maybe less so.
As he's faded.
Yeah, I miss Paul's stream badly, but he's doing good work making sure that we're not lacking Goblin Chain Rollers and Teferi's to play with. And
right. Poor Paul. I'm still blaming him for Bloodbraid Elf, by the way. For me, number one, of course, is Ryan Spain. He's the one who set my foundation, and in many ways, the big skill set that he had was A, fundamentals, but B, he was able to translate my other gaming knowledge, primarily from poker, into Magic. So he was able to say, the thing that you think about in poker, this is the equivalent of that in Magic. And I was able to hammer out some of those basic concepts pretty quickly as a result.
Oh, wow. That's really valuable I didn't think about that, because almost everyone I know went from Magic to poker. We all learned Magic when we were kids. Couldn't really play poker when you're 10 years old.
Right.
But since you had that other perspective, having someone who could bridge those two gaps and explain it in terms you to understand, that's pretty good.
It was critical. Yeah. It made the development just a lot faster, and it gave me a better fundamental understanding, at least, for where I should have been at the time. So he was absolutely huge, for that kind of thing. You obviously, like, I've watched you play for years now and have talked, infinite about Magic, both on the show and off and outside of it. And you've really helped me refine, my mindsets and my approaches, because you've definitely challenged me on stuff and made me rethink, some of the, like, basically taking it from a sort of, this is a solid fundamental level up to a, at least aspiring, expert level. And that's a big, that to me is where I'm trying to go from where I'm at now. And, since you're already there and you can understand kind of where I'm at, you've been able to do that really well. Ben, for sure. I mean, Ben to me was more like kindred spirit, like, cause I'd hear him talk and I'd go, yeah, that's the thing that I'm saying. Why aren't people saying what that guy, because again, he had that poker mentality and could break things down into language that I understood. And so, I really felt aligned with Ben as well. Yeah, I'd say that those are the ones that have had the biggest influence for me.
Yeah, and I think we reflect that in our show, right? Where we have like another person. Owen is someone who I've learned a lot from too. Kind of same situation as Paulo, where we're on the same team, and we have Owen on the show a lot. We have Ben on the show a lot. These are the people we gravitate towards to help explain things to listeners. Yeah,
there's a ton of different ways to approach our game. There's no doubt about that, but you'll get a certain vibe about how we do. Yeah,
and we're lucky enough that they still accept our invitations to come on the show. So
yeah, they do. All right, one last Crack-a-Pack. I think I said last week it was the last Crack-a-Pack, but I was wrong. This is our last Crack-a-Pack. This one comes from Nick at GPLA. Hopefully we get something sweet. Another thing I give away, by the way, to the patrons are the cards that we open here on the show, and I've got. It's probably about ready to go. Frilled Sea Serpent. No.
Yeah, it's a card you can lose to because it can get unblockable when the board is stalled. But yeah, it's not an early pick.
Lava Axe. No. Mind Rot. No. Daggerback Basilisk. No.
Not really.
Invoke the Divine. Still no. Here we go. Pegasus Courser. That card's all right.
Yeah, Pegasus Courser is really good. I think this is a good starting point to the best deck in the format right away.
There you go. Field Creeper. No. Aviation Pioneer, that's a nice one.
It's not bad. I think Courser is better, though.
I do, too. Viashino Pyromancer. Card's pretty playable, but I still like the Courser.
Yeah, I would take Courser, I think.
Yeah, it just gets in there. Here's a good one, Rabbit Bite.
Yeah, Rabbit Bite's not bad. I actually like Courser more because I think, even though the fight card is very good for the green decks, Courser I think the white deck is better and Courser is better than Rabbit Bite.
All right. Diamond Mare, first uncommon. I like this card a lot, actually. It's 2 mana for a 1/3.
We're going to get to it later, but I underrated that card quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I did too. Every time I've had it, I've been happy with it. It looked to me like another in a slew of 1/3s. The set is kind of rife with 1/3s. Yet this one really is a little bit better. Would you take it over Courser?
No, I would take the Courser. But I think Diamond Mirror is good.
Dragon Egg. Wah, wah. Two in a red, O2. Defender, when it dies, you get a 2/2 dragon with fire breathing. No, not really. Oh, here's one. Plague Mare. 1 black, 2/2. Can't be blocked by white creatures. And when it ATVs, all your opponent's dudes get -1/-1 until.
Oh, yeah. I think Plague Mare is quite good. It sits on red, black pretty well. Also kills Doctors out of the blue deck. I think that it's defensible to take Plague Mare over Courser, but I still would probably just start with the Courser.
Oh, I'm definitely taking Plague Mare out of that. We got a dual land Meandering River. That's the blue-white one. Not taking it. Oh, I think we had this last week. It's Gin of Wishes again.
All right. Well, I mean, I would still take the Gin. I think that Gin of Wishes is just absurd. And
me too.
There's no uncommon I would take over Gin of Wishes.
Yeah, I think Gin of Wishes is awesome, and I would take it too. And I'm going to put that in. I guess we use one of our wishes to get another one.
Wishing for more wishes. That's the classic.
Yeah, that's what we did last week. We cashed in the last one. Okay, so let's get into the Sunset show here for M19. This, of course, is the episode where we reflect back on a set as we're about to send it along and usher in the new set starting next week. We'll be talking about it. If you could summarize M19 in one sentence, what would it be?
I think that it would be Magic Fundamentals plus Chaos Wand.
Chaos Wand's going to get a lot of play in the Sunset show.
It is the kind of card that scores well in the Sunset show metric.
Yes, it does indeed. Yeah, I said solid core set with all the trappings that core sets bring. Basically, we'll go into more depth on that later, but I mean, there is a kind of artificial limit on how good a core set can really be, right? I mean, they are by necessity simpler and more watered down than you get on a normal set.
Yeah.
And that means that the ceiling isn't that high, but they did a pretty good job with this one. So what turned out to be the best archetypes?
Red white, I mean, as I alluded to in the pack opening, is the best archetype. I believe that a good red white deck is a favorite against everything else. The deck was not that hard to put together because a lot of the cards you wanted, no one else really wanted. Blue black control was quite good. And then I think a half step below those two are like the green ramp decks, which you could really combine green with any of the colors. It turned out that the green fixing wasn't multicolor as much as it can be. So like Elvish Rejuvenator, for example, it puts a land into play from the top 5, but that's not a fixer where you can play like 1 swamp and 3 Elvish Rejuvenators and splash a black card in your red-green deck. So the green decks were a green X, as in you could combine them with other colors, but it wasn't like a 3 or 4 color green deck, really. Right.
Yeah. The honorable mentions for best archetypes were there were pushed synergistic archetypes in M19, or I shouldn't say pushed, they were available, but they didn't really come together often enough to be like for example, I've had blue-white artifact decks that were very good, like really, really good, like as good as these decks or better, but you never could consistently get them. It wasn't like you first picked a couple of the cards that went into those archetypes and thought, okay, well, I'm good, right? I'm going to be blue-white and my deck's going to be good.
And that's part of what we mean by best archetype. Like, yes, there's the 10 different color pairs. The good versions of each of them were going to be pretty good, but like you could reliably go into red, white, or blue, black, and more so than the decks you're describing.
Exactly. And so that kind of held them back. All right. Which cards were we most wrong about during the set reviews, or which really surprised us one way or the other?
So I remember it's kind of funny that we didn't set review together for this set. So,
right. But you did write your set reviews for CFB. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the cards I put down were a combination of the cards I got wrong and then the combination of the cards that you and TBS got wrong. Don't worry. I did you guys a favor. I looked up the cards you got wrong and brought them up.
Thank you. Wow. Look at that research. The one that stood out to me was Siegebreaker Giant. Both TBS and I really, really liked it. I think we gave it a B or something in that range. And it ended up being like
wrong too.
Yeah, it ended up being like a C or something. It was okay, but I still look at it and think this card should be better than it's performing. Like it should just sort of be the 5-drop of choice for these aggressive red decks. And it just, I don't know why it never quite got there. Yeah. Why not?
I think it just had too low of toughness. I think
is it the 3 toughness? Yeah.
I think also if the like not blocking ability was a little bit cheaper, basically what would happen is you'd play this and you'd be able to activate it once on your next attack. And that's not enough to get it through. And it traded down for like, 3 drops or 2 drops, depending on what they had, if they had a 3/1. But so like, it just ended up being a little bit too awkward to get there.
Right. All right. So what else did you have here?
Goblin Motivator, the 1 mana 1/1 that taps to give a creature haste. It just turns out when you have Pegasus Courser and Starcrown Stag in the format, like those cards are pretty good to give haste to. So, that ended up being pretty good. Diamond Mare, as we mentioned, was something that we, I think, just pretty critically underrated because it's like a 1/3 life gain card for 2, and that doesn't look very good, but it turns out it just blocked enough. It was an artifact for like the blue decks. So both the black-white decks and the blue decks wanted it baseline, and then it was also just good in any control deck.
Yeah, for sure. Really good in control decks. Naming blue, go. That was a good feeling.
Vampire Neonate, the 0/3 for 1 mana that you could pay 2, tap, and drain them for 1. That card ended up being actually great. Like you actively wanted like multiple of those in your black-white decks, and even just like 1 to 2 in your blue-black control decks are really good. Yeah,
we had a good eye on that in the set review. I think I gave it a C or a C plus, which is, I think I would have it at C plus now. Good card. Like I noted, I can't remember what I compared it to, but there was like a 1/1 flying lifelinker.
Yeah.
That, it was sort of like that, but I said, but this one's unblockable, but it costs 2 mana.
Like that too.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. And like those cards, they end up being a lot more annoying and better than they look on the surface. And I thought this one might be too.
So then, as promised, the cards that I think that I was surprised when TBS didn't like them were Dryad Greenseeker and Declare Dominance. Both those cards.
No, wait a minute. I said Dryad Greenseeker was good on there. I was an early adopter of Dryad Greenseeker.
All I can go is with the feedback I saw of the show, where you guys drastically underrated the Dryad Greenseeker.
No, we did not. I was all over it. Although he did kind of put me to the test because it was like a hard card to figure out just reading it. And he said, like, today, would you take Druid of the Cowl over it? And I said yes.
See, that qualifies as underrating it. Come on.
I agree. But still, I took a few minutes to say, I think this card has a chance to be super good. I just need to play with it, I think is what I said. But yeah.
All right. Drastically underrated. Yep. Anyway. Okay.
Right. Noted.
Speaking of which, what were the most underrated cards for the public at large?
I thought this set got pretty well sussed out, but one card was Uncomfortable Chill.
Totally.
Not that it was great, but like that was a pretty darn good version of one of these effects.
This always happens. Effects that are classically bad, when a good version gets printed, it looks worse by comparison.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And Uncomfortable Chill is just a good version of that. All their creatures get -2, -0 for 3 mana, and you draw a card. Like, if you've ever ended up in a situation where you attack and your opponent triple blocks and you Uncomfortable Chill, like, oof. That gives me comfortable chills to think about.
I'm feeling uncomfortable now. The other thing too is that this happened to be a set where what we think is the best archetype had multiple ways to mass pump the team, and this card minused all of that out, right? So like if they're like Trumpet Blast, you could play Uncomfortable Chill and have survive the attack step, that kind of thing. So that was good too.
Yeah, I think the card ended up being quite good. Thornhide Wolves is another one that it's funny because there's 2 green 5-drops, and one's a 4/2, draws a card, and one's a 4/5. And I think the 4/5 ended up being better. It just
blasphemy.
I know that the extra toughness.
Man, you ride for Thornhide Wolves. Like,
I just love the Thornhide Wolves.
You're just in for Thorn.
I just find them. They always just have a very good effect on the board. They're pretty hard to remove. They don't die to electrify. Like they're just a big threat that your opponent has to deal with.
That's right. New category. What card will you think of when you think back on this set?
For me, it's Skyscanner. That little.
Oh yeah, that's good.
That little buzzy bee, the 3 mana 1/1 flying cantrip. It was colorless. It was just one of my favorite first picks. It was just so sweet to first pick Skyscanner.
I know. It was kind of like Skittering Surveyor. I just found myself gravitating towards it further and just not wanting to make a choice. The card I'll think about is Arcane Encyclopedia. I loved that card. It's not mana efficient enough to be a bomb or an excellent card. But man, that's the kind of card that can really turn the tide later, because eventually you draw enough lands that it starts to become, air quotes, free. to draw that extra card per turn. But there was times when you were getting beat down and you hated it.
I just dislike it because it is strictly better than JMD Tome, which is one of my favorite cards.
Yeah, that is a tough pill to swallow.
It is pretty damning evidence, I will say that.
What's the most controversial cards in the set?
Chaos Wand for sure.
Definitely
is number one. Like Chaos Wand is just the kind of card that looks crazy and has a really widely disparate effect on the game. And depending on who you ask, it's either like unplayable or a bomb.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because we were quite low on it in the set review, which I should have put that in the other one because tell me if this is where you're at. I have it now. If this were the set review and I knew everything I know now, I would give it a sideboard B+.
Yeah.
That's the grade I would give it.
I think that I would give it that plus give it like a sealed A. Like it's just one of the best cards you can open and seal.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's really important to note there. Also, Millstone, right, was a card that was very controversial. Is it a win condition? Can you play it? Is it unplayable?
Yeah, Millstone was interesting because in normal limited formats, it's just unplayable. But in this format, I think there's decent arguments for main decking it in control decks, especially against other control decks. And at the very least, it's a good sideboard card.
Yeah, I mean, my preferred Millstone, of course, is Psychic Corrosion, which we'll be talking about as well. It doesn't cost mana; it just happens. That's just rewards you for doing
better version of Millstone, essentially.
That's right. But I agree with you. Like much like Psychic Corrosion, if you sat down from an opponent who was playing, say, blue-black, you're very, very happy to have either of those cards in your deck. Like you are stoked. Now, sure, if they go Mountain Plains, well, you're in big trouble, and you really don't want to see that Millstone. What was your favorite artwork in the set?
Rock's Oracle, and that's because
the pizza delivery rocks.
Oh yeah, the pizza delivery rocks. It's just sitting there delivering a nice piece of pizza.
Oh man, the funny part is if you really look at the art too, like he's into that pizza.
Oh yeah,
right. Like he's like, dang, this is gonna be so good. Just setting it down. That's a great choice. Mine was Wall of Mist, which I don't know. I guess it's a big wall of maybe like water or mist out on the ocean or something like that. But God, it's gorgeous. It's got this little boat. It's just perfectly proportioned. I love that piece of art.
Yeah, it's a cool piece of art.
What were the best build around cards in the set? There's one that really jumped out for me.
Oh yeah. Sarkhan's Unsealing was head and shoulders above, I think. I think the rest.
And appropriately rare.
Yeah, yeah. It was, so this is the 3 in a red enchantment. Whenever you play a creature with power 4, 5, or 6, deal 4 damage to target creature or player. Whenever you play a creature with power 7, deal 4 damage to all enemies. It was the card that made me put Anaki Ogre in the most decks. And
definitely,
it was basically a red-green card because obviously you wanted to run the deck with Thornhide of Wolves and Rock's Pizza Oracle and all these other things. But I think that in general, Sarkhan's Unsealing was not a card that was like it would make you draft very differently. It would win a lot of games when you drew it, and it fit all the like classical definitions of a successful build around.
Yeah, it also didn't punish you too badly. Like, we talked about this once before on the show, but I find it really interesting to note that you could take Sarkhan's Unsealing out of a Sarkhan's Unsealing deck and still have a playable Magic deck.
Oh, for sure.
That's a big deal.
It didn't wreck your deck while doing so, which was nice.
Right.
So you included Patient Rebuilding here. I think that yes, that fits to a degree, but I almost think it doesn't because it's just so good already. Like
that's true, though. Look, if you first pick Patient Rebuilding, your deck looks way different than if you get it in like the third pack.
It's
right?
True.
Like you might have a bunch of flyers, or
it meant that you didn't need win conditions, but it also it didn't make you go draft a deck that's like really different than a normal deck.
No, that's true.
Unlike the last card here, which is very much that's a Psychic Corrosion, which is one of your favorite cards. So I guess you should talk about it.
Yeah, I really ended up I hated the card. I don't even think it's that great of a card, but BDM swindled me into drafting it because he sent me a bunch of drafts. He had drafted it 4 times in a row, and I just started taking it and putting it in every deck. And I was I learned a lot from doing that. I don't think it's optimal to do so. The card's still not great. I mean, it doesn't really do anything for a lot of turns, but what it does is 2 really interesting things. The first one is that it completely changes the way that you think about Magic when it's on the battlefield. Because now all you want to do is just survive. That's it. Attacking becomes stupid. You probably shouldn't do it at all. And Also, it rewards you for playing cards like Divination, which I like. I like, being pushed to do the thing I want to do anyway. But the truth is that you don't really need to turbo out Psychic Corrosion, although it's kind of sweet if you do. And if you've ever had, by the way, Patient Rebuilding and Psychic Corrosion out, which I have, that is funny.
That ends the game in like 2 turns or something.
It is so stupid. But it's again, it really, to me at least, makes me think about, well, what do I really need out of a win condition? Because I saw a lot of people trying to, I don't know, abuse Psychic Corrosion by playing like short-term card draw stuff. I can't remember what cards it was. So somebody sent me a thing on Twitter and they were like, should I put this in my deck? And I'm like, no, that card doesn't do anything either. You just need Psychic Corrosion in your draw step and then maybe a few divinations. And as long as you can keep the board controlled, you'll just win the game naturally over the course of time. Yeah. So I like that a lot about it. And then the other thing that it made me remember is that while it's often not optimal to have cards like this in the main deck, because against the average competition, it might not be what you want. Boy, when it is what you want in the main deck, like I said, I can't tell you how many times I had that card in my opening hand and my opponent went island and I'm like, please play a swamp. Yeah. Like if they play a swamp, they just can never remove it.
Oh, I had just this like busted
win the game.
Black-white control deck and my opponent played Psychic Corrosion on turn 3 and I almost just conceded right there.
Right, because you're like, I'm going to activate my Neonate, and they're just like, sure, dude, like grind it out, buddy.
I've got 3 Lich's Caress in my deck. Okay, that's nice.
Yeah, exactly. So it does make you think about it, though. I think overall, I would prefer, unless I'm building around it, specifically to have it in the sideboard. Bring it in when it's just amazing, and not have it when because it is really terrible. I mean, again, if your opponent plays a Plains and a Mountain, you're really bummed to have that card in your hand. Was this a Prince or a Pauper set, Luis? Kind of defies this definition.
Yeah, I think it was more a Pauper set. Like if I had to choose one of the two, but it did have some high impact rares, as they all do.
But it wasn't defined by that.
No,
right?
So it's interesting. Sealed is always more defined by your high rarity cards because everyone gets access to. There's 6 packs worth. And you get to you keep all of them, so you get to choose how you want to build around them. So, and this sealed was very much like based on like, if you had a Patient Rebuilding or a Sarkhan's Unsealing or what have you. For draft, I think I would say it's Pauper, even though the rares were high impact.
I think so too. The difference is just that normally when we think of Pauper, we think of commons coming together to define the format. So like, I have all these artifacts in my deck and none of them are particularly powerful on their own, but when combined, I have a great artifacts deck. And that didn't really happen here either. I do think that this set often relied on just raw power level. It was like, well, how many uncommons in your color pair did you get? That type of thing. But I don't think it was the bombs that defined it. What was the biggest Groan Test for this set?
For me, it was all Heroic Reinforcements, the red, white, gold card.
Oh, when you kill you out of nowhere card?
Two 1/1s into play. I think gives all your creatures ++1 in haste. I always just felt like I would be stabilizing, and then my opponent would just cast this card and I would just be dead.
So powerful. Yeah. Especially if it was like the smart people in the really late game would hold it and draw like a 3-drop and play that, then play Heroic Reinforcements and then crash in with everybody. It's like, okay, well, that game ended quickly. For me, the Groan Test was definitely Ether Tunnel on Vinemare specifically, though Ether Tunnel in general was always just kind of a tilt. But when somebody went turn 4 Vinemare and they were blue-green, you're like, just don't do it. Like, just don't do that. And they're like, Ether Tunnel hits you. And again, you're sitting there with your sweet, whatever the deck that you mentioned, the black-white life gain deck or the Psychic Corrosion deck, and you just, take 3 hits and you're dead from this.
Yeah, I'm glad Vinemare was an uncommon, by the way, but it did still end a lot of games.
Yeah. What was the most frustrating, quote, bad card
to lose
you
got there before me and the notes, but I can't disagree. Sovereign's Bite, the 1 in a black day, lose 3 life, you gain 3 life. I just
this might be the definition of this.
I mean, I just died to this card on stream and was like, all right. Because obviously if you put this card in your deck, you're never going to win, but it was bad.
Oh, man. Feels bad, man, in the chat all over the place. Yeah. All right. This is, I think, going to be an interesting one because I don't think it's entirely clear. What was the bombiest bomb in this set? The one card you wanted to open in your pack or your seal?
Oh, man. I think it is. I think it's very clear. I think Patient Rebuilding is just the best by a lot. It was just a win condition.
Lay out your case.
Okay. So it's a win condition that also gives you enough resources to keep you alive. it's like you cast this and your opponent's on like a 5 or 6 turn clock, whatever, maybe, something along those lines, 5 to 8 turns. But you're drawing an extra card or two a turn, and your opponent's just going to get buried. You can just start trading multiple cards for each of their cards and still coming out ahead because you're drawing so many extra cards. It was an enchantment. It was an enchantment, so they couldn't remove it by normal means.
Right, very difficult to get rid of. Yeah, that's probably its strongest attribute, is that it's an enchantment. I actually have a different answer, and trust me, Patient Rebuilding is very high on my list of cards in the set, but I have Tezzeret Artifice Master as number 1. And I think that the reason I have that is because it does many of the same things that you're talking about. It is a win condition in and of itself. It provides its own value, right? That its 0 ability is draw a card, and sometimes it's draw 2 cards depending on the board state. It even can win you the game with the emblem, but though you don't really need that if you've survived long enough and have enough Thopters flying around. But the thing that I really liked about it is that it can absolutely help you come back from being behind. And the Patient Rebuilding sometimes was too slow. You would play it and your opponent would just say, I'm just going to ignore that. Like, you're going to get a few extra cards, but you have to make use of them like within the next 2 turns or the game's over. And sometimes you could, right? You find the removal spell you needed and you'd stabilize, and then all of a sudden it was not even close anymore. But for me, I think Tezzeret was a little bit better as an overall card, even if it is ultimately, I think I would rather have an enchantment than a Planeswalker, because Planeswalkers obviously can be attacked.
Yeah, that's the main difference. I think Tezzeret's a windmill slam also. You're going to win a ton of games off Tezzeret. And Tezzeret does give you a blocker by itself, which is nice. But I think in general, if you play Patient Rebuilding, it's just pretty likely your opponent can't interact with it in any way. And then your only goal is to not die, and you get extra ammunition to not die. So I think that Patient Rebuilding is the best. All right.
I want to know what our listeners think. What's the best common for each color?
The removal spells, basically.
This is core set. I mean, very straightforward.
Something very different has to be going on in most sets for the removal spells to not be good enough. Unless, of course, it ends up being that they get like a bad removal spell. Because sometimes that happens too, right? Sometimes you look and it's just there aren't good removal spells available. But here, there's just perfectly solid ones. White has Luminous Bonds. Blue has Essence Scatter. Black has Lich's Caress, which I think might have been just the best overall common.
Yeah, I think so.
Red has Electrify, and green has Drew to the Cowl, which I do agree is better than Rabid Bite.
Yeah, that's the only one that was a departure there, but I liked Druid a lot in that one. This one was actually the hardest that we've had in a really long time, Luis. I ended up just making a list because usually a card jumps out right away, and I just didn't have it, though I think you did nail it here. What's the mythic uncommon for this set?
I think it's Dryad Greenseeker, because it's 2 mana for a 1/3, so it blocks okay, and then it just taps to draw half a card, 40% of a card. I think that's it's going to lead to the most wins. And it's so cheap. The cheapness means that it leads to a lot more wins. It also gets you out of Mana Screw or Mana Flood. Like, it does a very good job with both. Yep. So I think Dryad Greenseeker is, though the other things you put down here are very solid additions. Murder and Vampire Sovereign both stand out. Heroic Reinforcements is busted. Like, there's a lot of good cards in this set. The uncommons, this is kind of like a Duke set, right? It's not Prince, it's not Pauper, but
that's good. This one really leaned on the uncommons. I like that. That's cool. All right, what was the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last picked?
Yeah, just the unplayable rares. Alpine Moon's probably the one that does the least. It doesn't do anything. Omniscience obviously is just wildly uncastable.
10 mana. Yeah. Well, one of the cards that came to mind for me when I was looking through this is a little bit of a different category, but Infectious Horror.
Was that even in the set?
Like apparently, like it kind of, to me, it wins that cards in this set award. Like, I don't think I ever cast or had one of those cast against me the whole time. And then this is more like this one isn't actually the worst card in the set, but I just had to mention it. Gearsmith Prodigy.
Like, what are this was just a pump fake. This is the 1 mana 1/2 that gets ++so if you have an artifact. It's basically a fake build around card. So
that's right.
Yeah, it's not good.
And next, Maintaining the throne on the most begrudgingly playable card in the set is Tellurian Scholar, the king of begrudgingly playable.
Oh, yeah. Nothing right or wrong with Tellurian Scholar. It is just a card.
Yeah.
It hit its high point during Dominaria. Because
it was a relevant type.
It tapped for a mana to cast your Academy Journey Mage, and you tapped for 2 mana to cast your Wizard's Lightning. So there we go.
Yeah. There you go. Is there a card you're going to miss drafting? I put Psychic Corrosion. And look, I don't want to overstate this. I only drafted it probably 4 or 5 times, but I had so much fun doing it that it came, in draft number 60 or whatever, where I was just like, I've done everything there is in this set. And it just was a breath of fresh air. So that's what stood out to me. It didn't define my M19 draft experience overall, but it just stood out to me. So that's what I put for the card I'll miss.
Yeah, I think Salvager of Secrets is that one for me. I really like trying to construct decks where Salvager is good, and even though it didn't always come together, I thought it was pretty fun.
What was the Martialist card in the LSV?
Well, for you, it's certainly Exclusion Mage.
Not
you
close.
just get to pick the Manowar every time. I don't know if you're considering widening your breadth here.
But you'll notice though that they're rarely my favorite card in the set, right? Yeah. I usually pick something else, but the one that defines the way that I like to play, I mean, Exclusion Mage is like about as close as we're ever going to get back to Manowar, I think.
Oh yeah,
right. Like they're not going to print one that lets you bounce your own creatures anymore. So Exclusion Mage. What about for you?
Sky Scanner. I just love the Sky Scanner. It worked really well with a lot of different mechanics, and it was just a fine card to play no matter what.
Yeah. Marshall's Soapboxius card. Chaos Wand was the one in the early running, which we've talked about. But 2 a little bit later, also, I found myself climbing my soapbox for, which were Sleep, which I had to have a couple of arguments both in real life and on Twitter about the fact that Sleep is actually not very good in a control deck, even though people seem to think that it's just kind of free or something like that. Also, Sleep is the classic card that when it works well for you, it's like kind of a blowout. Like this could easily be the card you didn't Groan Test. Yeah. Easily Sleep. It's like, oh, we're playing a real game, and then boom, the game ends. Because the truth is that Sleep is really powerful, right? I mean, the raw power level of it, of being able to steal a game that you were way behind on or that you couldn't win otherwise, is very real. So I actually like Sleep quite a bit, but people just tend to put it into any blue deck and just think that it's good, and that's not always the case. And then Trusty Rusty, the Rustwing Falcon, is another one that, crept just up into playable for me, but was never a card I thought was really good or exciting. I thought, okay, the red-white deck can use it enough that you would play it, but it didn't really leverage it in a meaningful way. Like once you put a Knight's Pledge on it, I was kind of out. Like I didn't think that was a good game plan. So again, if it made it into your deck, sure. But like I've played against decks that had 3 Rustwing Falcons, and I felt like I couldn't lose because they were just so low impact overall. So that was one that I ended up talking about on the stream actually quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that those are good examples of the kind of cards that we not dislike for everyone, but we want to make sure people know what they're doing when they play them.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that, because it can be difficult for us in our position to communicate something like that, right? The takeaway is all too often, oh, well, Marshall doesn't like Sleep, Marshall doesn't like Westwing Falcon. That's not the case at all. It's just I want to make sure that people understand the context where it's good and the context where it's bad. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you?
Hungering Hydra, just because there's a million cards in this game. There's just a Hydra every set, and it's like, how does this one work again?
Yeah. And you know what? It still doesn't have trample, Luis. No matter how many times you read the dang thing, it still doesn't have it. For me, it's a Johnny's Last Stand, because there's this whole block of text about if it gets discarded and if you have a planes, what do you get? That kind of thing. And then the other one, strangely, is Inferno Hellion. I know what it does, but I can never remember if I sacrifice it at the end of combat or at the end of turn.
Also, you don't sacrifice it.
Or whatever it is. Shuffle it. Yeah. Shuffle it back into your library. I mean, yeah. Or does it go on the bottom? You see, I have to read it even now. What was your most drafted card on Magic?
Oh, yeah. It was the Sky Scanner. And I think.
Oh, really? Wow. Part
of it too is like it was a colorless card, right? So it's the sort of card which I can always find a reason to justify taking it.
Yeah. I actually thought mine was going to be Sky Scanner as well, because I'm super high on it. It was Salvager of Secrets.
Oh, wow.
By like a reasonable margin. Yeah. Like I guess maybe I was either early on it or I just liked it maybe more than I should have, but I thought that card was great. and I wanted it in all of my blue, basically all my blue decks, period. So that ended up being my number one. Okay, from a design and development aspect, how did this set fare? How were the mechanics? What were some of the wins, some of the losses?
Well, it was a pretty straightforward core set, and it did the core set things. You know, the mechanics were pretty simple. You had like life gain matters, you had artifacts matter. You had like, how do you solve this mechanic? It's like, well, you put artifacts and cards that gain you life in your deck. And those mechanics can be really fun. Those are both mechanics that are like good for more advanced sets as well, but also fit nicely into a core set. And, you know, I think the set did a good job of doing that. It had more build-arounds than the average core set. You know, less than the average like expert level expansion, but more than the average core set. I thought that was good. And I think that the wins were that it did deliver on the promise of low barrier to entry, solid gameplay. Like, these were unmistakably fundamental games of Magic, right? These were games of Magic where the stats of your creatures mattered. Having a curve was important, but it also wasn't the only thing. You know, you had to think about ways to kill enchantments and artifacts. If you were a slow deck, if you're a fast deck, you could maybe avoid that. But there wasn't anything really weird going on. There was no like Mirrodin, everyone has 15 artifacts in your deck, or Zendikar, everyone has cards that cost 1 and 2, or Dominaria, where people are playing like a lot of weird decks based around complicated synergies. The loss is that, well, compared to Dominaria, it actually lacked a lot of depth. And it's the sort of thing where Dominaria was going to be a tough act to follow no matter what, but this was the set that followed it. So it does pay that price. Yeah. And I think for the more invested players, of which there are many, this set didn't grab them quite as well. And this wasn't a like, yeah. I mean, you know, obviously you and I don't have the like exact statistics of which sets are more popular, but we know how much people talk about all the cards and the sets and the drafts, and this just had less surrounding that than Dominaria did.
Yeah, I felt like a couple of other losses too were like, you know, they had these tribal lords at rare, but then there wasn't really a ton of payoff for them, you know, within the set. Like it wasn't, you just basically never faced a tribal deck ever. So that felt a little weird. And then the build around stuff was like, it was there, like you saw what they were trying to do with these two color pairs, but they just felt like not fully supported in most of the cases. So if I wanted to draft, you know, I was like, okay, they're telling me that I should draft a blue-white artifacts deck, but then it just never really came together or didn't often enough, I guess. And I think that's true for basically all the color pairs. They ended up feeling pretty vanilla, just, you know, the things that are core to the colors rather than some other thing. Yet we had these random incentives. They ended up being more like payoffs that you had sort of incidentally rather than like a reason to be in the colors. And I think that's okay, you know, for core set, but it did make me think, oh, well, we're going to be doing these things. And then we kind of just didn't.
Yeah, I think it's always a struggle, like trying to balance, again, accessibility versus depth. And some of the sets do that really well. There have been some M sets, which I thought were very good at that. This core set was like slightly above average at that, which I do think counts as a missed opportunity.
Yeah. What did the format teach you? How did this format make you better at limited? What are the takeaways? For me, look, a set that lacks long-term depth, like what Luis was just referring to there, for us, for people like, well, me and you, Luis, but also a lot of our listeners, it isn't necessarily bad, right? The fact that the archetypes were fairly simple meant that some number of people that were just getting into limited may have had a better time transitioning into that just because they weren't overwhelmed. Like, boy, just looking at even the preview cards from Guilds of Ravnica, it's like, wow, like there's a lot going on here. There's all these gold cards. There's a bunch of text. There's new keywords. And even for somebody like me, who's a seasoned veteran at this point at breaking down sets and understanding what's going on, it's like, okay, there's a lot to take in here. If I was a brand new player for limited, I might just be like, I'm just not doing this. Like, I'm just not cut out for it. It's too intimidating. And a core set like M19 can absolutely be an on-ramp for people like that. So it's really important for us enfranchised players to keep in mind what the point of the core set is and to adjust our expectations accordingly. And I just sort of, M19 served as a reminder for that for me.
For sure. Not every Magic product has to be for every person. There's so many different ways to play Magic and interact with Magic. And yeah, we would love it if every draft format was like Dominaria, but I also don't think that would be the best for Magic. Like, I think we would be unhappy long term if that's what it was.
Yeah, I think that for me also, it's like, I got to remember to just do do my run of M19. And I ended up doing it longer than I think I thought I would. But then it's okay to just say, all right, I'm kind of done with this. As far as like the concepts, I've got this sorted out. Play in any tournaments I want to play in with it. But then, play Cube, right? Play the Flash Black drafts or, the Chaos drafts that they did, that kind of stuff on Magic Online. And I think it's like, okay for me to say, okay, I've kind of experienced this, because normally I just draft the set the whole time, but maybe not. All right. What was your favorite card in the entire format?
It is Chaos Wand. I thought Chaos Wand Chaos Wand was a lot of fun. I thought it did some cool stuff, and I think that it was cool when deciding when to activate it. And I also just like, rolling the dice and spinning the wheel, seeing what comes up. So I had to go.
My favorite was when I ran out multiple times against people. Like they got 2 spells off of me or whatever, and then they just spun the wheel, and it was like my whole library because I had a spell in my hand, and that was it. I like that too. My favorite card was Patient Rebuilding, not only based on raw power level, which is, again, it's near the top of the set or at the top of the set, depending on who you ask. But I love the way that it completely changed the game. Like you play that card and now everything's different. All the things that you were thinking about have to get flipped, and you had to start making a completely different plan for the game. And also you had this extremely powerful tool to help you enable it. But for me, it always brought a level of tension to the game, because it's not the type of bomb that you just play and the game ends right now. Right? When you play it, it's actually a liability. Like you just tapped 5 mana and said go. Your opponent's probably going to get you pretty good on that turn. And so you had to figure out when it was best to play it. And then it was like, how many cards am I getting? And am I going to be able to kind of make up the deficit that I've put myself in? And I love that tension.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely had some gameplay to it. And I have lost to Red White with Patient Rebuilding in play.
Yeah. Okay, so that's going to do it. Goodbye, M19. You were a solid core set, but probably not one that I'm going to come back to anytime soon. I mean, it was just sort of did its thing, but it wasn't really
it will be missed,
Yeah, I agree. And that's okay. It's not a knock on it. It's just sort of part of the deal with core sets. They have a natural ceiling to them. Okay, but that means that we get to look forward now to Guilds of Ravnica. We're going to be doing going over the mechanics and stuff next shows to prepare you for the set review that's going to be the week after. But we've got our exclusive limited resources preview cards from Wizards of the Coast. Thank you, Wizards, for these free previews. And we've got lockets, Luis. We've got mana rocks this week. There's 5 of them, 1 for each guild that's going to be in Guilds of Ravnica. So it's Boros, Golgari, Dimir, Izzet, and Selesnya. And these lockets are all the same in templating. They're common, they're 3 mana artifacts, and they tap to add 1 mana of either of their guild's colors. So I'll start with Boros. It taps to add red or white. Then they have another activated ability. You can pay 4 mana Boros Hybrid, which means it can be any combination of red and or white mana. Tap it and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. And there's one of these for each guild.
Yeah, so these are a take on the clue stones from Dragon's Maze. And the biggest difference is drawing 2 cards makes these really appealing. They don't just replace themselves. They actually put you up a card and do so at a point in the game where you don't mind so much that you're losing the ability to tap, that this taps for mana. So historically, 3 mana rocks have not been very good. Like in general, the obelisks and shards weren't great. The clue stones in Dragon's Maze weren't great, but these tapping to sack for 2 or sacking for 2 cards actually means I think these will see a decent amount of play.
Yeah. Now, how does it work though? Like, it's really interesting, right? Like, let's say I'm playing the Dimir locket, right? So I'm base blue-black. Let's just say my deck is base blue-black. Or maybe I'm blue-red and I play a Dimir locket. How does this actually pan out? Because ostensibly, we want to play these lockets not just for ramp, but also for fixing, like to maybe splash a card that's off color. Like, again, let's say I have a Dimir locket in my Izzet deck. So I'm red-blue base and I play a Dimir locket to play a black card that I want to splash for. At some point, I want to cash this thing in. So I'm going to need, in this case, probably just blue, right, out of my Izzet deck to actually get to that point. Are you worried? Like, is that a thing that you go, well, that's going to happen not that often? Or are you like, no, that's fine. Like, I'll end up being able to cash this in. I think
by the time you want to cash it in, you're mostly going to be able to. Because if you don't have the mana to cash it in, like in this example, it would be kind of hard to be flooded. Like, you'd have to have like 5 mountains, 3 islands to really feel the pain here. Because if you just have like 3 mountains and 4 islands, like, or 3 and 3, right? You're on 6 mana plus a locket. You're not always going to want to cash in it anyway. So I think that it's a lot.
Right.
It's not that big of a risk.
Man, 2 cards though. That's such a big game. So. Yeah. So these are cool. And they're going to be perhaps a key part of, going into a third color or even just ramping out stuff within your own color here. Because obviously they're super powerful if you stay in guild, right? Because you can just cash them in.
I'll have to see how the speed of the format shakes out, but it looks like, for example, the Dimir Locket is going to be a card you're going to play in a lot of Dimir decks.
Yeah. For sure. All right. So those are our preview cards. Thanks for those, Wizards. And we're going to be talking about a lot more cards from Guilds of Ravnica next week when we go over the new mechanics and kind of dive deep on how those work. And then the next week, boom, we're going to be in the set review. And I think it's going to be exciting. I have to say, Luis, it's been a little bit overwhelming looking at these cards because I have to be like, wow, get my mind out of M19 world and get my mind back into, true depth of Magic here. This is looks to be a pretty complicated and cool set with a lot of gold cards and a whole lot of
I'm really looking forward to it.
So it should be sweet. All right, that is going to do it for the show this week. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And don't forget to pre-order Guilds of Ravnica right now on channelfireball.com and get your LSV insect token as well. Again, when you pre-order, this is a really convenient way because you just put the order in now. You don't have to worry about, well, am I late or, did I not get a box in time? What's going to happen? Boom, they're going to ship it out to you once they possibly can from Channel Fireball, and you'll have that in your hands. Invite your friends over, have a booster draft, maybe just have one friend over and do some Winston or a seal deck against each other. And that's where you can do it, channelfireball.com. That's going to do it for this week. We'll talk to you next week.
So today we've got kind of interesting sign off.
Yeah, we got a little
We've got a public service announcement, an actual one too. This isn't about conceding to Tron or whatever.
Yeah, I should have said this because when you say that, people go,
"What
is going on?"
We're actually trying to use our platform for. I wouldn't say just good because we try to use it for good. Making sure people draft good decks is definitely using our platform for good. But this does touch on an actual topic, and that's voting. What we're going to say here does apply more to the United States of America than, other countries in general, because that's where we are. And that's kind of what we're trying to talk about. But voting in any democracy is very important. So don't assume that this only means the U.S., but that's what we can speak to because that's where we live and we know more about the systems here.
It's also, coming up shortly that we're having a major vote here in the U.S., so it's relevant to us.
And also, part of the reason we want to do this is the U.S. historically has fairly low voter turnout compared to a lot of other democracies. So,
especially young people.
So, the main point that we want to make is that you should vote. We are certainly not espousing who or what you should vote for in any way, shape, or form, but making sure that your voice is heard is very important because a lot of people assume, well, I'm just one of many. My vote doesn't matter. And it does, because if everyone thinks that way, that's how you get, things passed that don't reflect the views of the majority of the population, which is the kind of the point of democracy. You don't want your life and a lot of things dictated by the results of something that you could have influenced in a positive way, and you didn't for a lot of different reasons, right? Because it's difficult, because you don't know how to do it, because of apathy, all of those things. And in the U.S., we have a very important election coming up on November 6th that it's the sort of thing. And so we want to make it clear that it's not just the presidential election that matters. Congressional elections matter quite a bit. In fact, local elections matter almost the most to your personal quality of life. And what tends to happen is people, especially in the U.S., tend to not vote for the presidential election because that's like the big ticket one. That's the one everyone talks about. But voting,
that's right.
Consistently in local elections and state elections, in federal elections that aren't the president, it's something that we really feel that the world would be a better place if more people exercise their right to vote.
That's right. And these midterms elections that we have coming up in the U.S. are extraordinarily important this year because the tide seems to be shifting. And if you want that to happen, you need to vote. And frankly, if you want it to not happen, you're going to need to vote. And like Louise said, we're not telling you which way to vote one way or the other. That's up to you. But the question is, do you like the way things are? Are you happy with where they're going? This is a way that you can either perpetuate that or try to change that. I think that there's a propensity for people, especially in developed nations and in first world countries or whatever, like many of our listeners will be living in now, is if you have enough time and money to not only play Magic, but listen to podcasts about Magic, you're probably doing pretty well relative to a lot of the rest of the world. For us to think that things will stay good. If they're good now, then they'll probably just stay good. And while that might be true in a general sense, these things can change. They absolutely can. Things can change. And even if most of us in our lifetime haven't seen meaningful change, at least in the U.S., as far as, sweeping terrible things or amazing things, they can. And if you want to maintain status quo or push things in a different direction, the only reasonable, strong way you have to do that is to vote. And this is a big opportunity coming up on the 6th of November here in the U.S. So if you do live here, the things you need to do, well, you're going to have to register to vote. This is not a difficult process. You're going to have to look it up online for your individual area, but you do have to do this in order to vote. You have to, it's not enough to just be a citizen or to have a social security card or something like that. You actually need to register to do so. And the way that we're going to recommend doing this is to make a plan. And this is tough because I know it's just annoying and kind of boring and it's paperwork.
If everyone could vote on their
take time out of my week
smartphones,
for
which
that.
at some point I believe will be a reality, you would see a lot more voting.
Honestly, it's weird that this small chore is the difference, but I understand it too, right? Everybody gets caught up in their own life and they're busy, and this stuff is just annoying, right? Like it's the same thing with like, oh, you need a new driver's license. It's like, oh God, I have to go sit at this thing and fill out this form, and it's like. So there you go. But this is, this has an importance that underlies it that is much bigger than any meaningful chore. And so some of the things you can do are you can find out where your polling location is and what hours it will be open if you live in a place that doesn't have write-in ballots. If you need to go to a machine or a thing, you can find out ahead of time. You can make sure that you have that time on Tuesday, November 6th to do so. Right? Take half an hour or whatever to make sure that you can do it, because sometimes you have to say, hey, I got to take a long lunch, or I need to, make sure I get off a little early or whatever, because sometimes you have to go before work or on your lunch break or after work or all those things. Are you going to walk there? Are you going to drive? Are you going to take the bus? Are you going to grab an Uber? How are you going to get there? These are all things that are very simple if you just map them out like now. And then when you actually go to do it, it's like, it's easy. Then that part's easy. Because the hard part, at least for me, I don't know if you're like this too, Luis, but it's the unknown part. It's the like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go, what form I'm supposed to fill out, if I'm doing any of this stuff right.
Do I have all the proper things?
Yeah.
And what, as much as I wish voting was easier than it is now, the barriers aren't that high. If you go to vote.gov, you can, register to vote. You don't need an ID in the vast majority of places. I guess I can't speak to every single place, but in general, it's a fast process, just a couple minutes, especially, if you find a place that's near where you work or live. And the whole thing overall is, it's important enough that the amount of time it takes is very well spent. Yeah.
For United States, you can go to vote.gov, and I went to it just to check it out ahead of this. It's really simple. On the front page, it says, where do you reside? And you just pick the state that you live in, and then you click find out how to register, and it takes you to the next page. And it even has, if it's available to you, online registration where you put in your name and your information, and boom, you're going to get registered to vote, which is kind of the big hump, because I think there's something kind of exciting about actually voting, like about the act of going to the machine or punching in or sending in the thing and saying, I did it. You get the little sticker and everybody feels good about what they did, and they should. But the paperwork ahead of time is kind of the part that you don't want to have to do. But this does seem to streamline pretty well.
If this even helps a couple of people, vote when they otherwise wouldn't have. I would consider that a great success. I highly encourage people to vote and to, research what you're voting for, who you're voting for, figure out what you care about, and try to vote in a way that, helps your interests. I think that's the rational side of the argument, right? Is that if you care about something, voting for someone who will help make that thing work or come into being or support it, that's just good self-interested play. And even if you don't feel strongly about a lot of different topics, I mean, there are things you care about and new things that you think are better for the world, and this is a way to make your voice heard.
That's right. Great stuff. Get out there and vote. See you next week.